My name is Arthur Finch, and I'm 72 years old. For most of my life, I believed in the power of family, the unbreakable bond between a father and his son. I built a small but successful carpentry business with my own hands, hoping one day to pass it on to my boy, Michael. I pictured him there, sawdust in his hair, the familiar scent of pine and oak filling our workshop, carrying on the legacy. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The truth is, Michael had drifted from the business, drawn to the faster pace of corporate finance. He married Bethany Ashton, whose family were prominent figures in the city's social scene. They lived in a world of polished marble and hushed tones, a stark contrast to my workshop's honest grit. I tried to bridge the gap, I really did. I went to their fancy dinners, endured conversations about stock portfolios and charity galas, always feeling like a rough-hewn plank in a room full of finely lacquered furniture. The real turning point, the moment the ice truly began to form, was at Michael and Bethany's 5th wedding anniversary. It was a lavish affair, held at a country club where the valet parking alone cost more than some of my tools. Bethany's father, Sterling Ashton, cornered me by the bar. He was a tall, imposing figure, with a voice that always sounded like he was delivering a closing argument. "Arthur," he began, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "I understand you've been vocal about some of my business practices." I'd indeed voiced my concerns, not publicly, but to Michael, about some of Sterling's more aggressive land development deals. I thought I was simply being a concerned father, offering a perspective from a different kind of business. "Sterling," I replied, trying to keep my voice even, "I merely expressed an opinion to my son. Nothing more." His smile tightened. "Your opinions, Arthur, have a way of causing discomfort. Michael is a rising star in my firm. We value loyalty and discretion." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "Perhaps it's time you learned to keep certain thoughts to yourself, for Michael's sake." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. It wasn't just a threat, it was a dismissal, a clear statement that my presence, my very nature, was an inconvenience. I tried to talk to Michael about it later that night, but he just waved it off. "Dad, Sterling's just protective. You know how he is. Just try to get along, okay?" "Get along?" I remember saying, the words tasting bitter. He practically told me I was a liability. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Dad, you don't understand how things work in their world. It's different. Just try to be more mindful." Mindful. The word echoed in my head for weeks. Mindful of what? Of not being myself? Of not speaking my truth? Then came my 72nd birthday. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, for a simple family dinner. I'd roasted a chicken, just the way Michael used to love it, and baked an apple pie. I set the table for 3, polished the good silverware, and waited. The evening light faded, the chicken grew cold, and the pie remained untouched. No call, no message, just the heavy silence of an empty house. At precisely 8:17 p.m., my phone rang. It was Michael. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth. "Bethany and I have been talking, and frankly we're tired of your attitude." My attitude. That was their word for it. My refusal to be a silent, agreeable fixture in their polished lives. "Your comments about Sterling, your general disapproval of our lifestyle, it's creating a rift. Bethany's upset. Her parents are upset." He paused, and I could almost hear Bethany's whispered prompts in the background. "So, here's the deal, Dad. You have 2 choices." I closed my eyes, a profound weariness settling over me. I knew what was coming. "You can apologize," Michael continued, his voice gaining a hard edge. "A real apology. To Sterling, to Bethany's mother, to Bethany, and to me. You admit you were wrong, and you promise to be more understanding in the future." Or, the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "Or," he finally said, the words landing like stones, "maybe it's time you learn to be on your own, because we can't keep doing this." I stood in my quiet kitchen, the cold chicken on the table, the unlit candles on my birthday cake. My son, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the man I'd dreamed of building a business with, was giving me an ultimatum: apologize for being myself, or be cast out. "I hear you, Michael," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I appreciate the clarity." And then I hung up. What Michael didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already been preparing for a third option. Not because I expected betrayal, but because I had been paying attention. I had watched the distance grow, felt the subtle shifts, the slow erosion of our connection. I had seen the future Michael was building, and I knew there was no place for me in it. Within 2 weeks, I had set my plan in motion. I called my old friend Thomas, a retired lawyer who understood the value of quiet efficiency. Together, we meticulously untangled my financial affairs. The carpentry business, which I had always intended for Michael, was sold to my most loyal apprentice, David, who genuinely loved the craft. I set up an anonymous trust for a local charity that supported struggling artists, ensuring a portion of my life's work would continue to do good. My house, the only home Michael had ever known, was put on the market, quietly, discreetly. I booked a one-way ticket to a small coastal town in Nova Scotia, a place I'd visited once with my late wife, Clara, years ago. A place where the air was clean, the ocean vast, and the pace of life measured by the tides. The night before I left, I packed a single suitcase. No dramatic farewells, no angry notes, just a quiet, deliberate act of self-preservation. I walked through the empty rooms of my house, touching the familiar surfaces, letting the memories wash over me. Clara's favorite armchair, the scuff marks on the kitchen floor from Michael's childhood bicycle, the faint scent of wood polish in my workshop. I said my goodbyes in silence, a private ceremony for a life I was leaving behind. The next morning, a Tuesday in late March, I drove to the airport. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I pulled out of the driveway for the last time. There was nothing left to see. The look on Michael's face when he finally realized what I had done, when he found the house sold, the business gone, and his father vanished without a trace. That is the story I am here to tell you. But to understand that ending, you must understand the beginning, the life I built from nothing, and the love that guided me. I started Finch & Sons Carpentry with a borrowed $500 and a beat-up old Ford pickup truck. I put & Sons in the name before Michael was even born. Clara used to tease me about it. "Arthur," she'd laugh, her eyes sparkling, "you're already putting him to work before he can even hold a hammer." "I'm thinking ahead," I'd tell her, grinning. She'd just shake her head, her hand finding mine, a comforting warmth. "You're the most stubborn, most hopeful, most impossible man I've ever met," she'd say, and I knew she meant it as a compliment. That was 1978. I was 30 years old. We lived in a small, rented house, and Clara was 5 months pregnant with Michael. I'd spent years working for other carpenters, learning the trade, honing my skills. But I wanted my name on the sign, my vision in the wood. The first job Finch & Sons ever did was a custom bookshelf for a local bookstore. 3 days of work, $300 profit after materials. I came home that Friday evening, the check folded neatly in my shirt pocket. Clara was making her famous beef stew. I pulled out the check, held it up without a word. She turned, saw it, and her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated joy. That was the beginning. For years, it was just the three of us. Michael would come to the workshop after school, his small hands eager to help, even if it was just sweeping sawdust. He loved the smell of the wood, the rhythmic hum of the saws, the way a rough piece of timber could be transformed into something beautiful and useful. I taught him about patience, about precision, about the integrity of good craftsmanship. I taught him that a piece of wood, like a life, had its own grain, its own unique character, and the best way to work with it was to understand and respect that. Clara was the heart of our home, a constant source of warmth and laughter. She was the one who reminded me to slow down, to appreciate the small moments. She was the one who made our house a home, filled with the scent of her baking, the sound of her singing, the quiet strength of her love. When she passed away suddenly, 11 years ago, a piece of me went with her. It was a grief that never truly left, a quiet ache that became a part of who I was. After Clara, Michael became my anchor. He was 26 then, just starting his career in finance. He'd come over every Sunday for dinner, and we'd talk for hours. He'd tell me about his work, and I'd tell him about the shop. We'd reminisce about Clara, sharing stories, keeping her memory alive between us. Those Sundays were sacred. Then Bethany came into his life. At first, I was thrilled. Michael deserved happiness. But as their relationship deepened, I noticed subtle changes. The Sunday dinners became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Our conversations grew shorter, more superficial. He started talking about networking and social climbing, terms that felt alien to my world of honest labor. I tried to understand. I really did. I went to their engagement party, their wedding, their endless social events. I tried to connect with Bethany, to find common ground, but she was always polite, always distant, like a perfectly sculpted ice sculpture. Her parents, the Ashtons, were even more so. They saw me as an artifact from a bygone era, a quaint, slightly embarrassing relic. The Christmas dinner 2 years before my birthday ultimatum was the first real crack in the facade. It was at the Ashtons' sprawling estate. Sterling was holding forth on politics, making sweeping pronouncements that I found deeply misguided. I made a quiet comment, a gentle challenge to one of his more outlandish claims. It was a small thing, a mere ripple, but the silence that followed was deafening. Bethany shot me a look of pure exasperation. Michael cleared his throat and quickly changed the subject. Later, Michael pulled me aside. "Dad, please," he whispered, his voice tight with frustration. "Can you just not? It's important for me to maintain good relations here." "But he was wrong, Michael," I said, genuinely confused. "He was spouting nonsense." "It doesn't matter if he was wrong," Michael hissed. "It matters that you contradicted him, in front of everyone." It makes me look bad. That was the first time I truly felt the chill, the dawning realization that my son valued his standing in the Ashtons' world more than he valued my honesty, or even my presence, as myself. After that, the invitations grew fewer and further between. When they did invite me, it was always with a subtle caveat, a polite but firm request to be on my best behavior. I started to feel like a guest in my own son's life, a visitor who needed to adhere to strict rules of conduct. The day of my 72nd birthday, I woke with a familiar ache in my chest. It wasn't a physical pain, but the dull throb of loneliness. I tried to shake it off. I bought the chicken, the pie ingredients. I told myself this time would be different. This time Michael would remember. This time he'd bring Bethany, and we'd be a family again, even for just one night. I set the table with Clara's good china, the one with the delicate blue rim. I pulled out the 3 chairs, just as I always had. The afternoon light streamed through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, highlighting the emptiness. By noon, no call. By 2, nothing. At 4, I ate a solitary bowl of soup, standing at the counter, the untouched table a silent accusation. The pot roast was ready at 5. I served myself, sat at my usual place, and ate alone. The food was good, Clara's recipe, but it tasted like ash. At 7, there was a knock at the door. It was Eleanor Vance, a kind woman from my church, holding a small bouquet of daffodils. She'd driven 20 minutes to find them in March. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her eyes filled with a gentle sorrow that spoke volumes. "Happy birthday, Arthur," she said softly. My throat tightened. I swallowed hard, pushing back the unexpected sting behind my eyes. "Eleanor, come in." She stepped inside, handed me the flowers, and her gaze drifted to the dining room, to the 3-chair table, the pristine tablecloth, the unused wine glasses. A flicker of pain crossed her face. A quick, genuine empathy. "Oh, Arthur," she whispered. "The chicken is excellent," I said, my voice rough. "Are you hungry?" She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching, deciding whether to push or to simply be present. Then she took off her coat, hung it on the hook by the door. "I am absolutely starving," she said. We ate together at that table, the 2 of us at one end, the extra chair and setting still in their places, unused and unmentioned. Eleanor talked about her new grandchild, about a book she was reading, about the first robin she'd seen that morning. I listened. I ate. And slowly, imperceptibly, the knot in my chest began to loosen. "This is a really good chicken," Eleanor said, pointing her fork at me. "Clara's recipe," I replied. I know, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. She gave it to me once. Mine never tasted quite like this. You have to be patient with the brining, I explained. Low and slow. I am a catastrophically impatient person, Eleanor declared, and I laughed, a short, real sound that surprised even myself. Eleanor smiled at the sound, as if she'd been waiting for it. At 8:17 p.m., my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I looked at the screen. Michael. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:17 exactly. I set down my fork, picked up the phone, and answered. Michael, I said. Dad. His voice was flat, rehearsed. I've been thinking about some things. About Christmas. And about… Look, I think you owe Sterling and Bethany's parents an apology. A real one, not the way you sometimes do it where the words are there but the meaning isn't. A pause. And honestly, Bethany and I have talked, and we feel like you've been difficult lately, like you're not really trying. I said nothing, letting him finish the speech I knew he'd practiced. So, here's where I'm at, Dad. You have two choices. You apologize to Sterling, to Bethany's parents, to Bethany, and we move forward. Or, his voice hardened, a cold, unyielding tone. Or maybe it's time you figured out how to be on your own. The kitchen was very quiet. Eleanor was watching me from across the table, her fork set down, her eyes steady and serious. She could hear enough to know what was happening. Her jaw was tight, her hands flat on the table, and I could see she was working hard not to say something. I looked at the birthday cake on the counter, still in the box, still uncut, 72 candles I had not lit, waiting for someone to light them with. I hear you, Michael, I said, my voice steady and clean. I appreciate the clarity. Dad, he sounded surprised, as if he expected an argument, a plea. I ended the call. I set the phone face down on the counter. Eleanor was staring at me from the table, her eyes bright with a mix of fury on my behalf, and a deep, helpless grief. Harold, she started. Thank you for coming tonight, Eleanor, I said. I mean that. She pressed her lips together tightly, her eyes glassy at the corners, but she held it together. What are you going to do? She asked. I'm going to walk you to the door, I said, and then I'm going to take care of a few things. After Eleanor left, I stood in front of the fireplace mantel for a long time. The family photograph had been there for years. Me, Clara, and Michael, taken the summer Michael was 12. All three of us squinting into the sun at Lake Winnipesaukee. Clara laughing at something off camera. Michael with his arm around my waist. Me looking at the two of them like I had won everything. I took the photograph down. I found an old wooden box in the attic, one I'd made years ago for Clara's keepsakes. I placed the photograph inside. Then I added Clara's favorite silver locket, a worn copy of her favorite poetry book, and a small, smooth stone we'd found together on a beach in Maine. These were the things that truly mattered, the tangible links to a love that was real, a family that had been whole. I also recorded a video. Not a message of anger or blame, but a simple explanation. I spoke to Michael, to the man he once was, to the boy who loved the smell of sawdust. I told him about the choices he'd presented me, and the third choice I'd made. I told him about the business, about David, about the charity. I told him I was leaving, not out of spite, but out of a need to live my remaining years authentically, without apology for who I was. I told him I hoped one day he might understand. I saved the video to a USB drive and placed it in an envelope, addressed to him, with instructions to be opened only after I was gone. The next morning, the air was crisp and cold. I drove to the airport, the wooden box and the envelope in my carry-on. The flight to Halifax was smooth, the ocean stretching endlessly below, a vast, indifferent blue. From Halifax, a smaller plane took me to a tiny airstrip in Nova Scotia, and then a taxi to the coastal town of Lunenburg. I found a small cottage overlooking the harbor, a place where the salt air filled my lungs and the sound of the waves was a constant, comforting presence. It was simple, rustic, everything my old life wasn't. I unpacked my few belongings, placed Clara's wooden box on the small, worn dresser. 5 months passed. 5 months of quiet mornings, of long walks along the rocky shore, of learning to carve small, intricate wooden birds, a new craft, a new beginning. I learned the names of the local fishermen, the rhythm of the tides, the way the light changed over the water. I was Arthur Finch again, not Michael's father, not Sterling Ashton's inconvenience, just Arthur, a man finding his own way. Then, one crisp autumn morning, I walked to the small, quaint post office in town. I held the envelope addressed to Michael. It contained the USB drive with my video message, along with a brief, handwritten letter. In it, I simply stated that the house was sold, the business was transferred, and my affairs were settled. I reiterated that I bore him no ill will, only a hope that he would find his own peace. The postmistress, a kind woman named Agnes with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked up as I entered. She took the envelope, weighed it, stamped it, and dropped it into the outgoing bin. I watched it disappear, a small, white rectangle carrying the last remnants of my old life, on its way to a son who would soon learn the true cost of his ultimatum. I walked back along the water path, the sun rising low and pale, without fanfare, just arriving and doing its work. I thought about Michael, about the man he might become. I thought about the possibility of grandchildren I might never meet. I didn't know what he would do with the letter, with the video. He might call, he might not. He might find his own third option, in his own time. That was his to figure out. Back at the cottage, I made a second cup of coffee and sat by the window. The water moved steadily, honestly, entirely itself. 11 months of watching it, and it had never once been anything other than exactly what it was. I looked down at my left hand, the ring on my fourth finger, worn since June 14, 1977, the day I married Clara. It was staying there. Well, I said out loud, to the water, to Clara, to the empty room. Here we are, 72 years old, sitting by a window in Nova Scotia, not waiting for anything. Every single thing I had done in the past year had been a choice. The quiet departure, the legal documents, the memory box, the one-way ticket, the letter now in the mail. Choices, all of them made with both hands, the way I had built everything in my life. Imperfectly, deliberately, with full knowledge that whatever came next was not guaranteed. I was simply here, and here, it turned out, was enough. I've told you everything now. An old man, a sold house, a wooden box on a dresser, and a letter dropped into a mail bin on an autumn morning. That's the whole of it. That's my family story. My friend Thomas once told me, God doesn't promise us that the people we love will choose wisely. He only promises that we don't have to carry their choices for them. I held on to that through every hard mile of this past year. I still hold on to it now. If there is anything I want you to take from this story, from this particular life I've lived and stumbled through, it's this. Don't wait. Don't do what I did, spending years setting a table for people who had quietly stopped intending to show up, telling yourself they were busy, telling yourself next time would be different. The people who deserve a seat at your table will pull up their own chair. You won't have to beg them to come. Value yourself before the world teaches you to, because the world's lesson is always more expensive than you expect. I am not a perfect man. I made mistakes I can't undo, and I made peace with a few I can. That, I think, is the most any of us can honestly manage. This has been my story. One version of one family story that I hope left something useful behind. If any part of Arthur Finch's journey stayed with you, if you've ever been the invisible one in the room, or the one who finally chose the third option, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if someone you know needs to hear this story today, share it with them. It costs you nothing, and it might mean everything to them. Subscribe if you'd like to stay. There's more worth telling. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the very last word. This story is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.